Thank you all for joining today's Taking Care Life event. I am Diego Sosa. I am the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of CHAP in Brazil. I am joining you today from my home in Sao Paulo. I was born in Ecuador, but most part of my professional career was developed in Chile, in Mexico, and now in Brazil. A fun fact about me is that I really like old cars. I have 5 of them. I hope you can see the picture of my toys behind me. 4 of them are in Ecuador, and when I visit my family, I try enjoy them. Our topic today is keeping perspective, listening, and being heard. I think this is such an important topic to talk about, especially now when we are all facing our own mix of personal challenges, whether you live in Brazil, in Europe, in China, in the United States, in other countries or in other regions. Keeping perspective can be hard when so much is happening to us and around us during this situation. Joining us for this conversation is Dr. Kelly Watts. Kelly is a psychotherapist and resilience coach. She's joined us now for 7 sessions in the Taking Care series. Today, she's joining us from her home in Texas. Welcome back, Kelly.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
So I will start with some questions to you, but let me comment about me, also about the situation, just to put in context. About 15 years ago, I had a serious medical condition and I spent almost 2 months in a hospital in Chile, and I was very close to dying. I obviously recover. I am now in a great health, and I am grateful to CHA for all the support that I received during that time. I feel like this experience helped me gain perspective on things, but I don't think people need to have a major health scare or face a crisis to be able to have perspective. So, Kelly, how can we keep things in perspective as we go about our daily lives?
Sure. I think this opportunity, COVID or coronavirus the pandemic has given everyone an opportunity to reflect if they've taken it, right? And I don't know if you want to say a few words about when you came to your perspective. That's kind of a general term, but I think the more clear we can be about those values that come to the surface for us as primary, right? I know we spoke a little bit to this in our session with Colin Laird, but so for me over the last few years, I know that courage and compassion has always taken front and center when I reflect on my values and my perspective about what's important. And then lately, I've just started, in my reflections, I recognize that growth as a value has started to come up as a competitor. And so for me, when I am thinking about perspective and what's important and how to proceed and how to make choices that feel right for me, keeping those central is really important. So I think it's a great frame for today's conversation, because when we're listening and trying to feel heard, it's helpful if we can articulate where we're coming from and what's important to us. So, the more we can know that and share that with others, I think the better connections we can have in understanding.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I think we are saying that it's important to keep perspective and remain empathetic to the situation of others. And it's also important to recognize our own feelings about our own situation while trying not to compare them. Kelly, I am right?
Sure. And, that nods to a concept that we want to talk about in a moment, comparative suffering. But I think before we get there, we need to, really acknowledge one of the best researchers on, positive partnerships is John Gottman, and he identified that 69% of conflicts are unsolvable. They're just differences between two people. And so really approaching this listening and feeling heard, understanding that we aren't necessarily going to come to agreement, right? And so that idea of comparison that you mentioned, there's this human tendency to play judge and jury and listen to someone with a very skeptical ear and think, are they right? Are they accurate in their experience of this? And usually that's a disconnecting experience. If we can just listen and validate that, okay, they're having this experience with this without needing to agree, confirm, condone, simply understand. I can understand how you might have that experience. I might have a different experience of it, but really accepting that person's perspective and not comparing, because I think, comparison is rooted in fear and scarcity, right? And so then fear and scarcity brings us to compare our pain and our challenges, which lends to that process of trying to discern, I saw a meme go around at the beginning of this pandemic that said, basically, if you're not a frontline worker, I don't want to hear your complaints. And that just, makes a psychologist's skin crawl, because hurt is hurt, right? And challenge is challenge. And if someone says, well, I shouldn't be challenged, or I shouldn't be frustrated because I'm not sick and no one in my family is sick, it's still a challenge. Or someone might say, well, I'm just home with my husband and we're enjoying the weekend and I don't have to homeschool my kids. Minimizing our experiences doesn't help, right? What we know from the research is that validating our emotional experiences in ourselves and in others is what helps us move through it, right? It allows us to say, yeah, okay, I feel understood and I can move forward. And so when people say, oh, I shouldn't complain about, a disappointing loss, maybe not getting a project at work or not getting a client when my friend's wife has cancer, that doesn't really help the wife with cancer, right? There's not a finite, it's not like it's a pie and there's only a certain amount of challenge in the world. I kind of wish it worked that way, then the rest of us would be spared, right? But it's important to approach this saying, your challenge and your difficulty is what it is, no matter what I'm going through, right? And so every time we respond with empathy and compassion for the challenges of those around us, it's a connecting force that then allows us to be in a closer relationship, and we will feel heard and they will feel heard, and it just allows for better working relationships, better personal relationships. Everything will flow nicer from that.
Let's talk about listening. Active listening seems like a skill we should try all to master, especially in this virtual environment. We might miss cues that we normally pick up on during a face-to-face conversation. We don't have the opportunity at this moment to do that. Talk to us about how we can be better listeners, especially to those who may need to share something important to them.
Yeah, I think doing things virtually has certainly brought on a new level of skills in terms of listening and attending. We have some technology barriers, right? Just before this call, we did an audio check and how's everyone sounding? And I'm sure all of us have had the experience of being in mid-conversation and someone breaking up and having the opportunity to either try to decipher what they're saying by piecing together the bits that you heard, or press what I hope people are starting to do is say, hey, you broke up, this line's not clear, let's circle back or go to a different mechanism. So there's the kind of functional and logistical challenges right now to listening. And then there's good listening skills that I think we are having to employ even more importantly now. And so when it comes to really truly listening to our colleagues, particularly we're talking today about being online in a virtual space, I think when you show up to a conversation, the simple way to think about it is you can't be curious and critical at the same time, right? So as someone's speaking, you're thinking, not buying it, what are they going to say now? And you're ready to dismiss or negate or minimize what they're saying, you're not truly listening, right? But if you're listening with curiosity, it sounds more like, okay, I missed a bit there, I don't understand. Can you help me piece this together? It doesn't mean that you have to agree with it. It just means that you really want to understand. So empathy is about connecting to an emotional experience, right? You don't have to have had the same setback. Your wife doesn't have to have cancer. You don't have to have lost your job if you're trying to respond to someone who lost their job. You simply have to understand there's an emotion there. Okay, that's so disappointing. That's scary. That feels uncertain for your financial stability, or the fear of the loss of someone you love, or the actual experience of that. That's all we have to connect to. And all you have to do for that is to be human, right? And so to say, this is your emotional experience, I see you and you're not alone, is the goal. So just keep in mind that curiosity versus criticism. And as long as we show up in curiosity, we're going to be listening, because it's a generous contribution. We're not looking to get something out of the conversation, we're looking to give, right? And the practical side of that, I think, when you bring your whole self and your attention, I actually think that's been one of the benefits of virtual work. I think less people multitask when we're on video, certainly the smaller the group, the less multitasking I see. I think that, I don't know what you're experiencing, but the delay sometimes in language can make it difficult, or over virtual, and can make it difficult to know when to jump in a conversation. And so I hope that people are discussing, like, making, team norms around how, do you raise your hand, or do you get in line, or does someone moderate, or do you, just tolerate the interruptions? And I hope there's kind of discussion and acknowledgement about those challenges, right? How to signal when you're done, or just say, I want to know what you think, Diego, and it doesn't have to be that formal, but I hope that people are being thoughtful about that so that everyone feels like they're being heard. There's also a great interruption technique. People tend to be less jarred if you need to speak up and they're in a flow of a sentence. They tend to be less jarred if you use their name. It's just less off-putting than someone jumping in mid-sentence. And just be honest if the connection's bad, or you need to change your device, or you're having challenges that day with your personal life interrupting. Just be honest about the challenges and ask for cooperation and collaboration around navigating that, so that we can all continue to create the best practices.
The idea of listening assumes that someone is open to sharing with you, but some people may be scared to open up and talk to someone about what's going on in their lives. It's not easy to do that. How do we, as a friend, as a colleague, or even as a manager, create the opportunity for someone to feel comfortable sharing with us?
Yeah, I think we've spoken before about how so much more relationship is happening. I love that you share about your cars, for example. And when you truly get to know someone on like a multifaceted way, you can listen and feel heard in a different way. And so part of what you're speaking about is this idea of vulnerability and trust. How do I speak up about something that might be difficult or challenging? Maybe I'm someone who thinks of myself as quite productive or strong in my career, but right now I feel challenged and I'm not happy with my performance. How do I bring that up to my manager or colleagues in a way that doesn't focus on the shame I might be feeling, for example? And it's quite vulnerable. And so I think there's a reciprocal process between vulnerability and trust. And so I think some of what I spoke to a minute ago in terms of how we respond when someone shares something important is key. And I think we can lead with some person normalizing some of the personal things that are going on and the, kind of blurring of some of that so that people can feel human and connected and understand that they're not the only ones struggling. There tends to be this human pattern of thinking everybody else has it figured out except me, right? Everyone else is struggling less than me, only because we typically, don't share widely about our challenges. And so the more, not that every team meeting needs to become a therapy session, but just a nod to the challenges, the ups and downs, the fact that we're all figuring this out. And I think that the more we verbalize that to each other, the more open people will feel to share.
And to follow up on that, what if someone wants to share something important, but you don't have time at that moment? How do you avoid negative or hard feelings?
Sure. I teach a skill when I'm working with couples or people that are trying to have their voice heard more at work. And it's a simple formula of, making sure that notice when you launch into, let's say I'm the person sharing, I need to notice what's happening with the person that I'm hoping is listening, right? Even if someone doesn't seem like, I'm married to an engineer, so even if he's not actually doing something with his hands, he may be working on a problem in his head. So it's been a skill that I've continued to hone to recognize, okay, is he available, right? And so verbalizing that and making it explicit, hey, and so the formula I like to use is when you have X amount of minutes, right, depending on the situation and how big you think the topic is, when you have 5 minutes, I'd like to talk to you about a decision I need to make about whether I go back to the office. I'd like to talk to you about the challenge I'm having with this project or this colleague. So identifying what you need in terms of time and going ahead and top lining the topic for the person allows them to know, is this a conversation that I can respectfully engage in right now? Or do I have a presentation coming up in 30 minutes or a call that's coming in 10 minutes that won't give me appropriate time for this? And as a responder, I think it's important when most people don't lead with that formal of an invitation, right? And so if someone launches into a conversation about something that feels important, and we know in our mind, and we're thinking in our minds, oh gosh, my phone's going to ring any moment, I think it's important to say, hey, this feels important, and I want to give it, the appropriate attention. And so because of that, I want to put you on my calendar either later today or soon tomorrow. It feels too important to rush through, right? And making that specific, explicit comment helps someone know you're getting bumped off because I want to give this due attention instead of you're getting bumped because I don't think you or the topic is that important, right? So it's a big difference in that person's experience. Okay. I think the other thing to remember is that that's not always going to go perfectly, right? We might launch into a conversation hoping to feel heard, or someone else, we may realize later, I think that person was trying to talk to me and I was multitasking. I didn't even look up from my computer. And we can always circle back. We are not supposed to be perfect in any of these interactions. And so the power of the circle back, where you go back to somebody and say, hey, you shared something really important with me yesterday, and I was not present and I didn't show up for you the way that I wanted to. So I'd like to circle back to that because I really do want to respond in a different way. Or circling back saying, hey, I tried to talk to you yesterday about this topic that felt important to me, and I didn't feel like it was a good time for you. When's a better time, right? That circle back, trying again, is a key piece. I think a lot of people have this fantasy or myth that, we're supposed to execute it perfectly the first time. The more important the conversation, the more likely it is that it's going to need a different approach, multiple approaches.
Thanks. Carolyn, I know that we have some questions from our participants.
We do. Thanks, Diego. And I actually think this one, Kelly, maybe builds on a little bit about what you were talking about. First question is, what do you do if you repeatedly approach a conversation, but you feel like you're just not being heard?
It always depends on who's receiving that conversation, right? And what their skills in terms of the listening and responding are. And so you may have to work with that person and say, hey, I've tried to talk to you about this, and I don't know if I'm not saying what I need to say. This is really hard for me, but I really it's important, so I need to approach it again. Highlighting for someone that you tried and it didn't come across the way that you wanted it to, or it wasn't received the way that you hoped, it helps them kind of buckle in and listen differently. And some people also just aren't open to it. We have to know that sometimes we get shut down. And hopefully one of the things that I've learned about Chubb, certainly in a professional context, it feels like you guys have multiple managers and various team members. And so hopefully you can have some mentoring around how to be the most effective communicator in general, and maybe particularly with that person. Different people, I think we tend to stereotype with ages about how people like to communicate. I like to not box people in entirely with that, but considering that people have different preferences, right? So someone might prefer to have that important conversation via text message. Someone might prefer to have it on the phone, and someone might prefer to have it on video. And so we can check in with them about what's the best way to have that, or we can just know their pattern. But check your assumptions and your interpretations of their behavior, because we often get that wrong. And so it's important to say, hey, I noticed that it's hard to catch you on the fly. Is it better so for me, I know in my life, it's better to schedule a conversation with me. And so you just have to recognize the best approach with that person and reapproach if it didn't work.
So another good question that came through is, what would you do when it's hard to talk about your feelings, but when you have the courage to do so, the receiver of the information always turns it back to, sorry, someone else says, so always switches it back to what they're going through.
So this is part of the comparative suffering experience, right? People do it in a one-up fashion and in a one-down fashion, right? Oh, you lost your job? Well, you know, I'm getting a divorce, right? And as if that minimizes your pain. We can't be responsible for the response of other people. Depending on your relationship with them, you could share with them, hey, I'm trying to share with you, and it seems like you're focusing on you. And being clear about what you're looking for. Do you need someone to share empathy and compassion with you, and you just need to vent? Do you need problem solving? And we can train the people around us by asking for what we need. Look, and I also, you know, some of us experience other people as that one-upping, is what it sounds like. And I worked with a number of people that were given feedback that they were experienced in that way, where their intention was actually to connect. They were trying to be empathetic. But instead of connecting to the human emotional experience, they said, oh, I have this other experience that's either the same or more intense than yours. And so the person in the position of originally sharing felt like they were one-upped. And so that's not an effective response. And you would have to share with that person that you were hoping for them to understand you, and you were hoping for them to validate and empathize. And so you can call that, you know, then I was hoping you could just listen. You could say, it would be helpful to me if you acknowledge my experience. I understand you have your own experience. But talking about those process types, you know, of patterns, and really teach people around us to listen in a different way.
Yeah, and just so you know, we did have a couple questions come in on the one-upping, so I think that's great, and it addressed a couple people. Another question came in: how would you approach the situation where you're the third party, so you're overseeing a situation between two people who aren't communicating well, primarily because of one person's lack of listening skills? Are they in a position to intervene? And if so, how would you approach that conversation?
I don't know the exact dynamics of these three people, but I know I remember being in, you know, a big office situation in New York City and having a, you know, boss mentor say to me she could intervene, but that wouldn't be as effective, and that the person I was having challenges with, you know, she really coached me and mentored me on how to approach them so that I could diffuse the challenges. And that was a really great growth opportunity for me. As much as I, in the moment, probably would have loved her to swoop in and rescue me from that challenge, it established a different working relationship with that other person and really helped, I think, both of us grow. So I was usually, you know, in the psychology world, we call, you know, getting in the middle of two people's relationship, whether it's conflict or not, is called triangling. And usually that puts more pressure on the situation and doesn't actually resolve it. So typically, I think you could, if you have direct knowledge and you're happy to speak to each individual, you could say, you know, could we practice just really taking perspective of each other, or, you know, this give feedback or mentorship to one or the other person. But hopefully they're open to that kind of coaching and mentoring.
Another question is, this person is always seen as the problem solver and feels as if no one is paying attention when they have something that they need to talk about. Suggestions on how they may be heard.
Right. And isn't it interesting how if we don't offer empathy and compassion to others, they might not offer it to us. It's all part of the building of relationship, right? So I think as teams, you know, in small groups, we can start to speak to and create language that's just normal, kind of everyday language around, okay, that sounds hard. I hear your challenge. Thanks for letting me know. Do you need help with that? And there's a lot of research from anything from personal relationships to parenting to working relationships about making that distinction when someone shares something and asking, do you want help with this? Are you looking for solutions? Or do you just need us to know that this challenge exists so that we can understand what you're going through? people are more open to the feedback and the problem solving if you've asked and they've said, yes, I would like that input. And you'd be surprised at how often people will say, no, actually, I'm good. I know I can figure this out. I find it quite disempowering to rush in and try to rescue someone when they likely have the skills to figure it out, even if it's hard, right? And so to start from the place of they're sharing, it's hard, they've got this, and ask, hey, it sounds difficult. Anything you need from me? And let them tell you.
I think we have time for one more. This one is, as things are starting to open up in my community, my partner and I have very different views on what we should do. The discussion never seems to end well. I'm not sure that either one of us is really listening. Suggestions?
Right. So I would say kind of two parts. Number one, circling back to the idea of values, right? I actually predict that this is going to be a really challenging time for many, many people because we're approaching, we have more freedom to choose how we approach. Do we go to restaurants? Who do we include in our quarantine circle? All those freedoms to choose bring some stressors in terms of what's right. And so if you circle back to that idea of perspective and values, yours will be different from mine. What is right for you will be different from me. And I think there's this tendency in the human brain to want to be right. And instead, if we think, okay, what's important to me is, am I leading with thinking about my elderly mother? Am I leading with thinking about my child with asthma? Am I leading about thinking about freedom and the economy, right? And so you get behind the opinion and behind the approach of what's right and think, what values or drivers are there that that person is leading with? Sometimes it's easier to understand and respect, and you can say, okay, I respect that you believe government shouldn't be involved in our decisions, for example, and so you want freedom to access all of this. I have some fear going on for the safety of our family. And talking to it in those ways instead of just, is it right or is it wrong to go to the movies or to attend a restaurant, right? And getting out of the right and wrong of each decision and getting behind it to speak to values and emotions, I think helps people feel heard and try to respond in that way. So when I think it's hugely self-aware that question, whoever asked that question acknowledged that they're not listening either. So if there's the old active listening skills where I hear you say that you think we should go to this birthday party. I hear you say, and just state back to them, I hear you say that you think it's safe. And try to avoid using the word but, right? And just say, so I hear that, and you might be right. My fear is, or my thought is, or my belief is this. Right? And so try to not negate each other, but simply say, okay, I can hold that as potentially true. I have a different thought. How do we create a win-win where you feel, you don't feel trapped, but I feel safe? And speak to it in those ways where it's more respectful of creating a win-win.
Thanks, Kelly. I think we are at time, so I am going to turn it over back to Diego.
Kelly, thank you very much for joining us today. In tomorrow's session, Adrian Woodbury will join Kelly for a discussion about leading with empathy. You can register to participate in tomorrow's session, view the replays, and check out additional content on the Taking Care Serious Village page. Thank you all for joining us, and take care. Bye.